11, she's working.
I guess I'm
Danny, okay. Hey, we got some good things going on. Let me start the class with a few announcements. So, this is the last class of this quarter. So, the church is going to be changing over next Sunday. So, just everybody is aware, is going to be Mission Sunday. And Ben Steele and his team, they're going to be holding. So, your Sunday morning class, everybody's going to meet in the auditorium next week. We're going to have a special guest, Lisa Foreman. If y'all remember her, she's over in Albania, I believe. So she's going to be broadcasting with Ben live to the group. So we're looking forward to hearing from her next Sunday morning. So be sure and attend. Now, after next Sunday, I believe that will be the week of March 4th. A new class schedule kicks off for the church. And that will begin on Wednesday. Let me look at my calendar here. Wednesday the 5th, March 5th. So that first Wednesday will kick off our new class regimen. And just so everybody plans on it, in the window room Wednesday night, the shepherds are going to be hosting the class. Looks like Paul and Corinthians. Dave, is that right? Do you know?
Correct.
Okay, Corinthians will be hosted in here. And then on Sunday mornings, I believe that's March 9th, Dave and BJ Marshall will be in here on Sunday mornings doing a New Testament survey class. That'll be cool. So good to have the Marshall clan. Good teachers there. And then Sean will be in our fellowship hall. He's going to be teaching, looks like the Book of Kings. Or no, 1st and 2nd Kings, yes. So that'll be going on in the fellowship hall then. And I think Billy, also on Wednesday nights, I guess this is happening. I can't read Josh's notes. Anyway, do you know Billy's doing a class? You know, right off the top of your head.
Video class.
Okay, but that's going on Wednesday nights too? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending my class this quarter. Hopefully, everybody's had a pretty good time with it. I certainly have. So, as we have the grand finale today, kind of a visual of where we've been, where we're at to date. Last week, I think I'm missing one. No, I think we're good. So, these are all of the parables that we have attacked over the past 10 weeks or so. Now, how many parables are there?
38.
38. Thank you, Bill. These are the ones that I touched on, what I thought were some of my favorites. Today, we are going to conclude with another one, and I'll surprise you with that here soon. But the parables, as we finish up, the big man right here on screen stares us all down. It's the best teacher of all time. These parables, I think we would all agree, are life-changing. I would encourage you that as we end this class and move on, keep referring to these parables. Open up your Bibles. Pick one or two. Keep reading. Keep reviewing them over and over. Share them with your kids. You know, if you're having a friend study group, let this continue to be maybe a focus. The parables are really the greatest teaching tools, that we get from Christ himself while he was on this earth. And if y'all can just imagine being one of his disciples, walking around with him from town to town and hearing this and being a part of this discussion and seeing all of this unfold, You know, it has to be mesmerizing. So what I'd like for us to do is, you know, we've covered a lot of ground the last 10 weeks. Let's have a little recap. What were your takeaways up to this point? What things resounded with you in our lessons from these parables? Who would like to share? And again, Jesus is staring you down right now.
One cool thing was, a lot of times when you read the Bible, you're just reading through it. The words are familiar. Sometimes you don't think about it, right? Which is why Bible study is important. But one of the good things you brought out, like I remember, was we talked about the banquet, the wedding banquet, and we had a lot of input, like what goes into a wedding, right? And it was just a ton of stuff that we were all contributing to. But I think when you just sometimes when you read these parables, this class has brought us deeper, right? Give a little bit more deeper meaning. So for me, like that wedding banquet, it's an easy thing to like, it's the wedding banquet, blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot that goes in. And when the master was like, listen, you don't appreciate,
Yeah.
So it was just nice to go deep on some at the very beginning. That's sort of like what you do in these classes.
Yeah.
Kind of bring
That's
us in
right.
deep, sort of like, what does this word mean? What all goes into it. So I appreciated that.
All right. So we've all had a deeper understanding. I agree with Danny there. I think, over my time, I've often have glazed over some of these parables. You read them fast, just kind of move on, get quick tidbits. But then when you spend the time on it, it's kind of amazing what rings out. What else? What have we learned?
I think Jesus answers questions without directly answering the questions.
Okay.
He,
Okay.
he steps back and gives them information so that they have to end up answering the question in and of themselves a lot of times. Now, they all often ask a follow-up question, but it's still, a lot of times we get very blunt with people by answering their questions directly. And Jesus doesn't do that most of the time in these parables.
Why do you think Jesus did that?
Because he wants us to think.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. What else did we learn? Was there anything specific or generalities? Sean?
And I think just about the parables themselves that even though Jesus wasn't the first to teach using parables, he used that method as a down-to-earth kind of way to communicate God's word to the people. He didn't come and necessarily speak as a philosopher and use a lot of words that the people couldn't, and concepts that the people couldn't understand. He left it on this level, talking about farmers and banquets, as you mentioned here, things that they could grasp to communicate God's word.
Yeah, things that they understood. It's something that, when he taught, he taught them, correlated the lesson to things that were applicable to that was going on in their lives at that point. Yeah, it has a lot of meaning there. Okay, good. What else? Were there any favorites of yours that you like? Are there one or two parables that just constantly maybe resound in your head?
I appreciated the explanation or discussion about the shrewd manager, because I never understood that one.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, the shrewd manager, that was a good one. Do you think the disciples discussed these? I mean, remember, the Bible was written, they were it was recounting specific events, but I sometimes sit back and wonder, I think there's still a lot of verbiage that the Bible doesn't share as a result of the human interaction that Jesus had with his disciples. So I sometimes wonder, I wonder if, some of these Peter and John were sitting around and kind of debating this themselves,
I mean, we know that they asked him, what did you mean by this, like, on a number of occasions, so
Yeah.
it must have been all discussing it at some point.
Yeah,
just
somewhere.
like, someone had to ask
Right.
that, right,
Uh-huh, yeah. So what else did we learn? Any overall themes that you heard from Jesus that stuck out?
I think one of the things that stands out for me is that things are not always as they appear, or sometimes, Jesus tended to flip things from what we would expect.
Okay.
Whether that's the parable of the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, the person that you would not expect, the person that we've made to be the bad person,
Okay, sure.
really is the one who turns out to do what Jesus, to live the life that Jesus is expecting.
Okay. I'm gonna put surprises. I think there were a few. That's a good example. When you look at the Good Samaritan, I mean, why wouldn't the righteous Pharisee, the one, those that claim to have God on their side, be the one to lend a hand? I think that's a good example. What else? Carol.
I see God bringing the kingdom down to earth.
Mm.
In other words, from the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth like it is in heaven. So he gave us a view of heaven and spiritual things and on the earth, how heaven was to look like on earth. So we'd be ready for it.
Yeah.
When we got there.
Yeah. Preparation. I love it. Okay. Anything else? What else did we learn? What struck your heart?
Brian, he talked about forgiving debt.
Forgiving debt. Why is that important to you?
Well, if you give somebody something, if you're giving it to them, it's not a debt. But it's kind of like if you say, I'm loaning you something, or money or whatever, it's like a debt.
Yeah.
It's like I said, two different things.
Yeah.
So giving is you giving it to them.
Right.
But like I said,
Okay. Let me share a few things that really struck home with me, and I know I've talked to some of you. Oftentimes when you teach a class, I think the teachers get more out of the lessons than sometimes their audience does. And I think those that have taught can agree with me because you spend a lot of time digging into this stuff. And there's a lot of aha moments. I think we would all agree, Jesus, through his parable teachings, he taught his disciples about love. In multiple different ways. It's what you give, it's how you act, it's how you react. It's that attitude that he instilled through his lessons. He obviously taught, like what Walter said, forgiveness, right? We touched on that in a big way with the unmerciful servant. Forgiveness is huge. What I picked up also out of the parables were patience. You know, imagine being the disciples and you're hearing these lessons, right? As Carol said, we get a view, sort of a kingdom to the earth. We're seeing this in full view. We're seeing this. Disciples are hearing what's coming, what the potential is going to be. Oftentimes we're like, well, we want it now. We want it now, 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 now. But really, in a lot of these parables, Jesus is teaching his disciples to be patient, that things will happen. They're going to happen, but it may not happen according to your personal time.
Brian, can I make a comment? on
Yeah,
that?
please.
You know, kind of flipping through the notes that I wrote. And I think that one of the other things that was a good reminder to me is that we're more of the vessel. You know, part of the patience is Jesus. You know, I'm looking at the notes about parable of the weeds and mustard seed and yeast. And, you know, I wrote Jesus is the seed, right? We plant the seed, but I'm not sure we're always responsible, or we don't always have to be the one to grow it. I mean, that's what Jesus does, and we have to. The patience, I think, is trusting that Jesus is going to do that growing, that Jesus is going to be the one that waters and grows the seed that we've planted.
Yeah.
And it's not always us. I think I want to do a lot. And some of it is trusting that Jesus is going to work all things together for the
That's a
good.
good point. That's a good point. I think there's a real balance here he's teaching his disciples. You know, Jesus is laying this foundation. But ultimately, what is he going to want his disciples to do? Is to continue to carry this message through the whole world. So he's laying the foundation, not only for them, but even for us, right? We are the vessel. I love that statement. The disciples were that vessel. The understanding has to begin with them in order for them to be able to share it with the rest of the world. Today's final conclusion actually hits on this very notion of being the vessel. And when we think about parables, this one right here. The parable of the workers in the vineyard. Now, I'm an old ag boy. I'm a Virginia boy. Farming and agriculture has pretty much been in my whole blood from my family and my experience, and that's the industry that, quite honestly, I'm still involved with today. I love it. Oftentimes in the Bible, you hear a lot of agricultural examples, right? And this is one that he really touches on. Why that is, no mystery. Back in those times, agriculture was the economy. It was the way of how people lived and thrived. The workers in the vineyard. How many in here like to garden? Raise your hands. Okay. You got a few? You got a few? Anybody come from a farm background? Okay. What was your family? Any particular?
Raised hogs and cattle, corn.
Okay, good, cool. All right. Anybody else? Carol.
Cotton and soybeans.
Oh, hot diggity. Cotton and soybeans. All right. Those are intense crops. Anybody else? Any family that farms? Anybody like that? Yes, sir.
Yeah, my family had like all kinds of crops and pig farms. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Apples. Apples. All right. Yeah,
farm.
Okay.
Things.
yeah,
things.
all right. Debbie's husband, Ben, his family had cherry trees out in Washington. He's often talked about that story, having to pick cherries, and, as a kid, either he loved it or he hated it, but he had to go do it. I think Dave?
I was gonna say, both of my grandfathers grew up on a farm, and one became an optometrist and the other one owned a restaurant, because they didn't want to be on a farm.
Well, I think we'd all agree, farming is hard work. Doesn't matter what particular thing you might be raising or growing, it's pretty labor intensive. In biblical times, especially this particular parable, vineyards were a common thing there in the Mediterranean. I mean, remember, the Roman Empire was a vast empire, and they relied on a lot of these regional areas to produce a lot of the crops that supplied much of the Roman goodness, right? So either people raised things for themselves locally, they still sold to markets to be able to provide for the greater geography. Winemaking was a big thing. There are several examples in the Bible that Jesus shares about this, right? But, today's agriculture, we're here in the U.S., sometimes we get accustomed to all the mechanization that goes on, and we think it's pretty easy. And, I have worked with farmers that have these massive machines to get things done, but there's a lot of crops that are still human labor intensive. There hasn't been any major device that's been created yet to do this, and sometimes for good reason. So if you think about grape harvest, that's a kind of harvest that you really can't mechanize. Think about, now apples are a little different. I know they've created this where you can shake the trees and get some of this. Yep. Picking is the preferred. Yep. Mike's the one. He has to go. And he's like, Mike, go out there and get that, would you? Grapes, though, have to be hand-picked in a lot of ways because of the sensitivity to it. And it's hard work. It's hard work. We all love this, though. I think for a lot of us, one of my favorite times of year is the fall time. You get to harvest time. A lot of us take our kids often to the old pumpkin farms, the patches, to go pick your pumpkins for the season, or we all go up to Carter Mountain Apple Orchard and pick apples, and we love to get outdoors, right? It's God's beauty all around us. Lisa and I took a drive out to Scottsville, Virginia yesterday, and we went to a couple of vineyards. It was beautiful. The sun is shining. I was already cooped up being in the house all week for work, so I was ready to get out anyway. But when you drive around and you explore and see the beauty that God has all around us, there's nothing better than the land itself. This parable I love because as we're going to venture into, it looks at the very nature of these workers and who's needed to work in this particular farm, if you will, or vineyard. I think oftentimes we take it for granted for what has to be done. And I'm sharing all of this to sort of set the stage of what we're about to read here in the parable. But it challenges us all. And this is why I wanted to conclude with this particular parable today. So as we leave here, there's a real underlying message. So let's turn our Bibles to Matthew chapter 20. And in fact, we're going to read a little bit above in chapter 19, beginning at verse 27, because this kind of sets the stage for the parable Jesus is unfolding here for his group. And let me read this for the sake of time. So, Matthew 19, beginning at verse 27, Peter answered him, "We have left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us?" Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first." Goes in now to the parable, Matthew 20. "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, 'You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' So they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. 'Why have you been standing here all day long, doing nothing?' 'Well, because no one has hired us,' they answered. He said to them, 'You also go and work in my vineyard.' When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, 'Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first.' The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more, but each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. 'These who were hired last worked only 1 hour,' they said, 'and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day.' But he answered one of them, 'I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?' So the last will be first, and the first will be last." All right. What's jumping off the page to y'all here? Yeah, okay. Man, I wish I would have known that, right? All right, so what else do you pick up on? Obviously, the guy that came in at 5, you got a good day's wage. What else you picking up on?
Grace is God's to give.
There's some grumbling going on. Yeah, Dave?
Grace is God's to give.
Okay. Grace is God's to give. We definitely have a lot of grumbling. Why are people grumbling?
It's not fair.
It's not fair. What else has happened?
I think it shows that the amount of work that we do is not really the focus. The focus is that God gives what he gives, I think.
Okay. So the amount of work that we do, ultimately, it's gonna be up to him.
Right.
To
Not that
share.
it's not important, but it's not the focus, I think. Because
Okay.
like our actions matter, but what matters more is like kind of like what Dave said, God's grace. Grace is God's to give.
Yeah, okay.
His grace is not dependent on our work.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not what we deserve.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not about what we deserve.
Right. It's not what we deserve. Because like those guys were, you know, in our mind, they were deserving of a full day's wage or deserving of an hour's wage. So it's not about what we deserve in terms of work. It's completely separate from about God's grace, like Faith was saying.
The perception of the workers was one thing. They thought, to Danny's point, they deserved a larger compensation as a result of their own effort. Jeremy?
I think that deserve is, they didn't deserve, or they didn't think they deserved anything other than what was agreed on when they agreed to work until he started paying the others. So they thought they deserved 1 denarius until they saw somebody else that came in and only worked an hour getting the same amount.
Okay.
Then that perception changed.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
But the other thing is, I was thinking the landowner, i.e. God, is always looking for workers. There's always work to do in the kingdom.
Let's talk about the landowner for example. Let's look at this parable and let's look at this particular character that Jesus is sharing in this parable. Describe this landowner.
He's always seeking help.
He's always seeking help. He goes out how often to look for workers?
Like 4 different times, right?
Yeah, at least 4 different times of the day. He's intent on trying to find labor to come in and be part of that vineyard. Okay?
He's willing to compensate for those who come in and work.
He's willing to compensate. He's gracious. I mean, it clearly states that. Now, I think this can be a challenge. I mean, we all know business owners out here. And I've worked with business owners a lot through my career. And there are some that are gracious and some that are not so gracious. This particular landowner is amazing. You know, one of the biggest complaints I hear from small business or just business owners in general today in my travels is that they never can find enough help. And the help they get are never loyal enough to stay around. So there's so much turnover. It drives small business owners crazy because they can't build any consistency. We read this parable. What do we notice about the workers prior to them getting hired? What are they doing? Standing around. They're on the sidelines, just standing there. What was the one excuse? Remember the guy came back at, 5, and the landowner said, why are you still? Nobody's hired me. When I first read that, I think, how much effort, though, did you put in yourself to want to get hired? You know, it's like me telling my own kids, you got to get a job, boys. Come on. You know, it's not going to just come to you. You got to go after it, right? How bad do you want it? Yes, ma'am.
So I love that part because I mean, it's, I think of it as God's word, right? I mean, someone at 5 o'clock, like, why haven't you been, with God? Why haven't you already been over here your whole life? He's like, well, I've never heard of it. No one's ever told me about God, right? Or Jesus. No one has ever, so I didn't know. No one's hired me. No one's pulled me over. And like, that's a good excuse. I mean, why wouldn't you? If no one has ever told you about it, no one has ever given that gift to you, then why would we begrudge that one person who hasn't heard of God at 5 o'clock?
Right.
He is equal to me that if I grew up with him, right? I mean, I felt like that was a really good excuse if you take it out of the, the parable and put it into what it's supposed to, sort of represent.
Yes, sir.
I'll throw a twist on that one though. It's like this makes me think of like the Jeffrey Dahmer situation where you have someone that did unspeakable things, goes to prison, gets baptized in prison, and dies there. And assuming that, he legitimately believed, right? We take that as an assumption, right? It's a lot harder for us to justify that. This isn't someone that didn't hear about it. This is someone that really did some bad stuff.
Yeah. But that's again, it's God's
Yeah,
grace to give,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
that. Thank goodness that's His decision, not mine. I'd be like, he should go to hell. That one, but
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
His grace.
Carol, you had a thought.
Well, Carol Baker and I are the same age, and she was baptized 4 years ago. And often when we were together, she would say, "Oh, Carol, I wish I had loved God as long as you have. I wish I had known about it as long as you have." It was the sweetest thing. And I tried to reconcile. I knew what she was saying and feeling. So I would have to say something like we're talking about. It'll be the same. It'll be the same. You and I will have the same. I know you wish you had more time. Yeah. And she loved the church and she enjoyed going to everything. So I know but in heaven, we'll have the very same. So that's the consolation, I think.
And I know the second bell has rung, so let me ask this question. Stop and think about the vineyard itself. Imagine, what is our vineyard today? What is our vineyard today?
The unsaved.
Okay, yeah, can be the unsaved. Can be church. Life. Imagine yourself as one of these workers. Yes, you're getting paid, right? Well, they got a denarius. But think about who you're with, who you're working for, the surroundings that you're working at. These people didn't have a job. They have a place to go. They have a place to be part of. Our vineyard is church. It's life. It's our community. It's everything outside. When I read this parable, I thought, yeah, okay, they're getting paid, but there's some benefits here. They have a place to go and actually feel they have a purpose. And I look around this room, and I think we'd all agree, and we look at the whole auditorium. We've got friends and family all in this room. We are brothers and sisters, part of this vineyard. We're still working the vineyard. We really are, but we're doing it together. Yeah, Carol was baptized a long time ago, but her friend came in later, but she's still part of the vineyard. They're together. We're together. No matter when your conversion took place, you're part of the family. We're all in this vineyard together. This parable speaks volumes and is really a challenge to the disciples. Jesus, at this point, he's trying to get his group to really understand this notion that there is work to be done. It's up to us to do that. I mean, we are the laborers in this vineyard. No matter when our brothers and friends come to recognize Christ, we often talk about, well, you know what? I don't know when my spouse is really going to come to the agreement that Christ is real, or my friend is going to accept that. But we keep working with them or her, that at some point in their life, they'll recognize that. I love this verse out of Luke. And Jesus states to his disciples, you can find this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, this specific thing. It's important. Jesus told them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. There's so much yet to be done. God's grace and salvation are available to all, regardless of when that person's faith comes about. We rejoice when they come to that conclusion. And I think our challenge, as corny as it is it's our time to go out and harvest. You know, we are part of this vineyard. Enjoy it. You've got brothers and sisters here to support you, lift you up when things are down. You got the parables in this wonderful book to constantly refer to. Share them with your children. Share them with each other. I'll leave you with that. I want to thank you all for this quarter. It's been fun. I've learned a lot from you guys. And any final comments?
I like corny. That was good.
Corny. Good.
Corny.
Corny, like that. All right, everybody. Thank y'all. Have a great week. Deb, how are you?
Hey, we named this the Kaiser emoji.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right.
So, when you're talking about the guys that stand around, I was thinking about how to bring these poultry dealers. Oh, yeah. The biggest poultry dealer in North. He's the one that worked for Sunny Purdue.
Oh, wow.
How are you?
He used to say, he goes,